Hello everybody and welcome to another list video. Today I have 5 hot takes from members of our community. So I asked recently in our Discord channel, which you can join, there's a link down in the video description, if people had any hot takes, and I screenshotted a bunch of them to make a list video here, because one of my favorite things to do is constantly look at my thoughts and opinions on ARKHAM and learn if I can get better or change it from different perspectives. And the things that always make me the most potential growth, I find in the past and currently to today, is when I read something and I go, what the hell? That's absolutely crazy. And then late at night, I'm in my bed and I sit up and I'm like, oh, that's right. It is. I should be playing this card more. I should be playing it in this direction, because if I'm playing it like this all the time, I'm not getting the full value. And this is actually one of the things why I wanted to do this, because I love reading hot takes and then looking at those hot takes and deciding, is this actually something I believe in and what can we learn from it? You'll also probably notice in our videos, especially with Travis and Bryn, that I kind of exist in a spot of agreement with them. Number one, because I'm facilitating conversation in the video, but also because I just generally love getting differing opinions on a variety of different things, because I feel like it's a good way to learn and improve in my ARKHAM deck building and gameplay. So I have 5 hot takes here to talk about. If you have any hot takes of your own, feel free to drop them in our Discord or in the comments, and I might include them in a future one of these videos, because I've had a good time putting the 5 of this together. To dive in and talk about and see how it goes. So that's enough babbling. Let's get to our first one, which I know for a fact is going to ruffle a few of Travis's jimmies. This is... it's two people actually said it. So this was like a starting conversation that came with this. And this was, I hate Prepared for the Worst and always regret picking it. And also, I think Prepared for the Worst is an actively bad card and encourages bad deck building. The first one is a nice soft little hot take. And the second one is like, boom, we're dropping some spice on this. So if you don't know Prepared for the Worst, it came out in Dunwich Legacy. It's a 1-cost event. It's a tactic. Search the top 9 cards of your deck for weapon asset and add it to your hand. And then shuffle your deck. So, I will say that I see where they're coming from, because it is kind of just one of those cards that I don't think feels good to play. For a while, especially when we first started playing ARKHAM, this was a nice card because we really didn't have a lot of weapons to work with. We didn't have a lot of search effects. And like Guardian card draw was actually not too good. So being able to find your weapon with Prepared for the Worst worked really well. This has extended into a lot of our teaching videos, which is all about Prepared for the Worst is a good card because it helps you find your weapon. But if you can look past that, that's like kind of like the surface value lesson of Prepared for the Worst, right? Which is Prepared for the Worst is a good card because it helps you find your weapon. However, there's a little asterisk on that, which is that your deck's game plan should have ways of finding what you need. That's kind of like what the teaching lesson is behind Prepared for the Worst. And I think now there is a lot of different ways to find what you need, and I think Prepared for the Worst in a full collection, even in like a collection where you're having more pieces of your puzzle come together, like you have like more options, like a half collection, I do think Prepared for the Worst ultimately is getting squeezed out. If someone played Prepared for the Worst, I think that I wouldn't bat an eye. But I think that Prepared for the Worst is getting a little bit squeezed out. I also will try to remember to bring up the point that I think a lot of people I've seen play Prepared for the Worst aren't playing it correctly. Which we'll get to. But first I want to talk about some alternatives and why I think that Prepared for the Worst is getting squeezed out. Tetsuo Mori, he is a great asset, costs 3, so 2 more than Prepared for the Worst, but he also soaks for you and other people, and then he's been defeated. You can search the top 9 of your deck for an item or card in your discard pile. So like, it's a good way of using Tetsuo Mori to act as a pseudo prepared for the worst, while also giving you a boost to what you're doing. Backpack 2 is like an example here. I think Backpack 0, sorry, I think is unplayable. I think the card's actually pretty bad. But I think Backpack 2 is a very nice card. I do think that you need to be doing it beyond just like searching for weapons to really make Backpack 2 pop. With that said, I do think that it's another reason why Prepared for the Worst is getting squeezed out. A lot of the times, actually, like I will start, if I do have a Prepared for the Worst in my deck, it is to replace it with a backpack down the road. But I think, again, I mean, there was a hot take that I'll get into a future video about backpack. There were some words on backpack as well, but I want to save them for that. Another option, I just have 45 automatic here. It's not specifically 45 automatic, but a lot of times the thought process is just, instead of those 2 copies of Prepared for the Worst in your deck, just turn those into another weapon, right? I think this works really well with Tetsuo and even this backpack here, which is just like add more weapons. Don't rely on just one weapon to get the job done. However, with that said, I do think that let me finish with the Glory too. It's just like card draw, right? Like if your deck has more card draw, you'll be able to find your weapons and go through it. However, with all this said, to go on the other side of these people's hot takes about Prepared for the Worst, which ultimately I do agree with more than I disagree with. I think like with any card in Arkham Horror, there's always exceptions to this, right? And I do think that, like, if you are trying to find, like, if you're building around a specific gun, for example, a Prepared for the Worst, or a specific, like a Holy Spear, right? Prepared for the Worst is still gonna do the job, right? Like, the card is still, there is some risk associated with it, and whiffing on it does suck. It being 9 versus Backpack's 12 is a notable difference as well. But I think there are use cases for Prepared for the Worst in your Arkham decks. However, I do think that the problem, and I think why a lot of people have this opinion, is that Prepared for the Worst will whiff if you are just like playing Prepared for the Worst and 2, like, I don't know, I'm just going to say machetes as a placeholder. That's not going to be good enough, right? You need to have, I think, more to it to make it work. However, there are decks like a Tommy Muldoon deck where you're building around a signature Becky that I think like Prepared for the Worst actually can kind of like bring a reason to be played, but still at the same time there's a lot of risk associated with it. So while I don't go as far to say that I think it's an actively bad card and encourages bad, I mean I do think it can encourage bad deck building, but I do think that it goes beyond that as well, as that an identity of a deck can change from deck to deck, right? And while in some players' opinions, it might be bad deck building to only build around like a signature weapon in your deck, at the same time, like that is a deck. And maybe the deck isn't powerful, but I wouldn't necessarily say the deck is like bad. It's just fragile. It's a glass cannon style of deck. And those can exist, and when they pop off, they're really good, and when they stutter, they don't. However, if you're doing stuff like that, you need to be looking at more than just Prepared for the Worst. You need to also be looking at Tetsuo. You need to also be looking at Backpack, because you're probably going to be reloading your weapon, right? Like, it's kind of like in tandem. You want like more pieces to make your puzzle work, and that's why it's a bit more complicated than just like never play Prepared for the Worst or always play Prepared for the Worst. But as we often say in our videos, when we say like Prepared for the Worst is a good card, it's just like a placeholder for it's like with Ward of Protection, always ward the Ancient Evils. It's a nice blanket statement for new players, which is just make sure you have like your deck needs to be able to do its function, right? All right, next one here, we got the basic draw action is actually pretty good. So this is an interesting one. I think this one's really neat. And I think ultimately, I'm going to say none of these takes are actually particularly hot to me. Maybe they're hot to you if you're watching this video. But I do think that all these takes, I mean, I think they're interesting. That's why I'm choosing them for this video. I actually think none of the takes in this one really threw me. But I also, like I said, I kind of agree with everything. I'm like, yeah, that's true. That's interesting. You know, I think that perspective is really neat. But this one, the basic draw action is actually pretty good. This kind of goes again with what we say in our videos, which is like the basic draw action is bad. And that is kind of like the blanket statement of, it's bad, right? It's you'd rather find your success, like your draw in other sources. And that's why, like, I have the examples here: Eureka, Overpower, Deep Knowledge, as like ways to do active card draw, or like, you know, like Glory, a slide on the other one. If your card draw is better if it's not just 1-for-1. That's, I mean, but I know like Eureka and Overpower are 1-for-1, but they're actually not, right? Because you're also advancing the game state with both of those cards. You're probably evading an enemy, passing a willpower test, using your book to investigate a location, using Overpower to find an enemy. So like you're advancing the game while also replacing the card in your hand with something else. However, with all that said, you're going to draw cards, right? Like the basic draw action is just a card for an action. It's not great. I wouldn't even say, like, for me personally, I don't think it's good. I think it's fine. However, you have to like weigh in and look back at the number of basic draw actions you take, and then the cards that you are drawing, what is the reason that those cards are there, and are you any of your cards, would they be better suited in your deck to be cards that drew cards, like Deep Knowledge, or like, you know, like Glory, or like, you know, just like an upgraded Overpower, you know, all those kind of things. Like, can these cards be replaced to make my economy more efficient? This is actually something that I've been wanting to make a video on for a long time, which is how the basic actions, specifically the draw one card, or gain one resource actions, are actually very powerful tools when you use them at the right time. For example, the wrong time is when you spend your turn drawing 3 cards. And you're doing it out of desperation because you haven't found what you needed. Maybe you're prepared for the worst whiffed, for example, and you need to find something, your weapon, right? Those are what I call, like, that's like the basic draw action that you don't want. The basic draw action that's good is, or the gain a resource action is good, that if you're rounding out your turn and you don't need a card, you want to gain a resource, you don't need a resource, you get a card, or you just want a card. Like rounding out your turn as your third action is a fine use for these things. It's not great, but it's still fine. I always feel personally bad when I'm doing it because I would rather advance the game state with every action I take in some way, and I don't feel like it does enough. However, I do think it's fine, and I do think that in the right moment, it's critical. There's an example that I did a thing ages ago where through my Patreons, we did a thing where there was various groups that were challenged to see how deep they could go in the depths of Yoth standalone scenario, which if you don't know how that does in standalone, there's no end. You just try to see as deep as you go. And I commentated on the game and scored all the players' points because, you know, it's fun to have a little bit of competition. But what happened was there was a moment when a player had a Spectral Razor in their hand and they had 0 resources. And they chose to draw a card. So Spectral Razor, if you don't know, is a very powerful kill spell. It costs 2 resources. They chose to draw a card from their hand into their hand as their last action. This should have been a gain 1 resource action. And this is what I mean, like why these 2 draw 1 card or gain 1 resources actions are actually powerful tools that you can use if you are like thinking into the future of the game, right? Like if I need these resources right now. Like, I don't need these resources right now, but I need them to prepare for the future, are very nice things that, like, you can set up to the right thing. Because that player, they didn't gain the resource, so they had the Spectral Razor. They gained 1 resource at the end of the turn. During the Mythos phase, they drew a 3 health enemy, and they were like, I can't fight this thing. And if they gained that 1 resource instead, they would have been able to kill the enemy that they were with their Spectral Razor. So now, of course, I'm not saying that it was a mistake. Like the draw 1 card action was bad there as just the draw 1 card action in and of itself. It's rather that these actions, I think, can be powerful tools in the right place and time. So I agree. I don't agree that it's actually pretty good. I think that it's not terrible, but you just need to like be using it at the right time and not all of the time. Because if you're using it all the time, you can ask yourself, how can I make my deck better and more consistent? To, you know, take advantage of, instead of drawing, I can be drawing more or drawing while progressing the game. All right, next up here, this is a card game that really wants to be a video game. So I think this is actually also entirely fair and completely accurate. So on this slide here, I actually don't have too much to say about this one because I think it's just true. I play a lot of board games. Even though we do release ARKHAM videos every day of the week, this channel is playing board games, so we do play board games. And I love ARKHAM Horror, but it's probably one of the least elegant board games I've ever played. There's so much chunkiness to the game that is like... The rules system is a little bit complex. I mean, a lot complex. There's a lot of errata and addendums to stuff. There's a lot of FAQ things you need to look up. And there's just so much space that, and so much like mechanical pressure that it puts on the players to keep track of when the game goes. And yes, it would be a lot easier if this was a video game and everything was automated. Another example of the complexity is this blew my mind when I did it. I was like, what's a card that's going to have a lot of FAQ text on ArkhamDB? And I was like, Luke Robinson probably has like 1 or 2 points. No, this is a zoomed out shot of the FAQ section for Luke Robinson. As an example of that, if this was a video game, this would just be something that's nice and simple and covered, and like it just does it for you. Another example here I have is Gloomhaven, which is another very complex game with actually a lot of it's like the enemy AI is determined by the players, and there's a lot of rules complexity that comes with it. There actually is also a Gloomhaven video game that that does it for you, and it's a lot smoother of an experience because you don't need to think about the enemies. They're just going to do their thing. You don't need to like actually move the pieces. However, with all that said, while I think this statement is 100% true and 100% fact, I would not want this to be a video game. I like that it's paper. I like that it's a board game. While I play on Tabletop Simulator, I don't like playing on Tabletop Simulator. It's not nearly as fun for me as playing in paper. So it's one of those things that like, I think this is an entirely true thing, and I think that it actually is a very good criticism of ARKHAM Horror. I think another good criticism of ARKHAM Horror is that there's a lot of expansions, and getting into the game now is really tough. But I do think that this is both a negative, but it's also a positive for the game as a whole, because the complexity is what makes the game so interesting and what makes the game so playable. But I think this is an entirely fair point and a good critique of ARKHAM Horror's rule system, because I think that's totally legit. Again, I know I agree with all these hot takes, but I am coming to this video with the perspective of giving these, kind of like devil's advocating these hot takes. All right, next one we got here is Father Mateo is high tier now. Interesting, huh? Interesting. So this is something that I think about a lot. Every year at Christmas, we make a tier list for the power level of investigators. So I'm constantly always thinking about my own personal power rankings, because they are personal power rankings. They are not factual power rankings. They are just our own personal rankings. And I don't necessarily agree with this one. I think Father Mateo can potentially be higher tier, but I don't think he's high tier, because I do think that like while he is there's so many good investigators in this game, and I think that there's some cool things you can do with Father Mateo, but I think those cool things, like some examples here where like the Ancient Covenant does that, it's like you can do those with other investigators as well. However, with all that said, if I turn this hot take on its head, I can warp it to make it a point that I actually agree with, which may go against the purpose of this, but bear with me on this, because I think that this is also a fair statement that kind of like relates to this. While I personally don't believe Father Mateo is high tier now, I do personally believe that Father Mateo actually has a niche that he can fill, which is Elder Sign fishing. And I think this niche was boosted by that gal on the left, Olive McBride 2, which I think is one of the craziest cards to come out of Hemlock Vale. This allows you to have such a big shot every turn to fish out the Elder Sign token. There's also the Broken Diadem in in Hemlock Vale, the new neutral card that I think also works really well for Father Mateo. But I think that's Father Mateo got a lot of nice pieces in Hemlock Vale. While I don't think crazily boosted his power level. Like, I think he's a higher tier, potentially. I need to play him to, like, figure it out. For me personally, I don't think he's, like, high tier, but I think he's moved up a tier, potentially. But I think what makes me most excited about Father Mateo is that there's, like, a reason... There's a new build that you can go for it that's, like... I mean, it's not new because people have tried it in the past, but it's a more consistent build that you can go with. I think also, like, the Ancestral Token, you know, like, filling it up, Ancient Covenant being, like, a combat Father Mateo and then using Ancient Covenant, I think is a really cool trick as well. But yeah, while I don't, like, generally necessarily agree with the take that he's high tier, I think he is higher tier potentially, and I think, as again, to warp it, I think the dude has a little bit more spice in his life now, which is infinitely more interesting than the position he was in, I think, before Hemlock Vale. So I think Father Mateo got a nice boost, and I'm excited to see if they make more cards that could potentially help it. Because I do think the autofail fishing. Autofail fishing is not a game-winning plan, but the Elder Sign fishing, I think, is a really cool strategy that I would love to try and makes it uniquely him, because his whole Elder Sign is just, it's a powerful effect, and digging for it is a very nice thing. All right, on to our last hot take here, and I think this one's pretty interesting as well. This one is, I think, consistency in search and drawing cards from your deck ruined parts of this game. And this one got me thinking. This one actually, it had my brain stewing over this one for a little bit. Because I was like, is this actually true? Because I do think that decks have gotten more consistent. And I wanted to see, in my heart of hearts, if it was because of search and drawing. And I think I personally came to the opinion that it's not search and drawing that have ruined parts of this game, but rather, I think that the payoff cards, like the stuff that you're, like, building towards, have gotten more consistent. So, sorry, have gotten more consistently good. I think that, like, this is actually something that's true in Magic the Gathering and, like, other card games. The more you're able to search and find things out, the better they are. So I think there is truth to this. But I looked back, and, like, while I'm using some examples here that are experience cards, like Cryptic Research, Stand Together 2, Gift of the Jewel of Aureolus, these are cards that you play today. So they've been here. I only looked in Core and Dunwich, right? But there's also Laboratory Assistant, Old Book of Lore. I do think that search and stuff has gotten better, and I think that it's at 0. But I think for me personally, this is less of that searching and drawing of ruined part of this game, but mostly that I think the experience cards have gotten, like, really fucking good. And a lot of those are having searching and drawing. Like, it's one of those things where I'm actually curious to see what people think on this one. Because it's fun to win Arkham, right? It's fun to win Arkham, but it's also fun to lose Arkham. And it's like, it's tough, right? Because, like, my gut disagrees with this hot take on its, like, after, like, sitting with it. But I think that there is something there that has made decks better, but for some reason, I don't think it's search and drawing. I think it's just that, like, experience cards are just so damn good. I think Scarlet Keys brought in, like, its high tier cards were so freaking good, right? Like, we look at, like, a fully upgraded Runic Axe. Sure, it costs you 10 experience, right? But, like, you get 10 experience in one card. So you only need to find one copy of it from your deck, which, yes, it's like searching and drawing makes that, like, easier to find. But, like, I think, like, when the payoffs have gotten as strong as they have, it's it causes like the game to become like a little bit too easy, right? So for me personally, like I think there is something to be said about this point. But for me personally, I think it's less that the search and draw are ruining things, but more that the cards that you're building towards are just like so powerful. They're just like spicy meatballs, right? Like they're very good. Because I mean, like Laboratory Assistant is a very strong card at level 0, but Laboratory Assistant has been, I think, as good as she has from her release to now. Like, I don't think she's necessarily gotten better. I just think that the cards you can find are better, right? And it's one of those things where, for me personally, I would rather they lower the power level of the cards than make search and draw worse, right? Because search and draw really actually depends entirely on what you're drawing towards, or if you're being degenerate with that draw. Like, for example, Amanda Sharp. Like, she can be degenerate with her draw, but I don't think, like, for example, Ursula Downs is bringing the same sort of meat to her draw that Amanda Sharp can bring. And if you impact the cards that Amanda uses, they also impact Ursula, right? Where the problem is then, look at the card, Amanda, and break that. As opposed to, this is actually something that people were talking about with like Sleight of Hand in our Discord as well. That Sleight of Hand was destroyed, well, not destroyed, it was changed because of Seeker things, when like the Seeker things that were destroying it maybe should have been looked at first, right? This is something that Bryn always says, Seeker keeps breaking Rogue's toys, and I think it's the same kind of thing here. We should look at the payoffs, not the tools that help you find the payoffs, because I think the payoffs themselves are just a little bit too spicy. Now, of course, if they release like we look at like Cryptic Research versus Deep Knowledge, they are actually like pretty comparable cards. While I do think Deep Knowledge is really good, I think that Cryptic Research is still also very good and also very playable. It's just like a fast freaking card. Stand Together 2, Stand Together 3, sorry, is also just a very, like, these are like good cards that can still be played today, but a lot of people don't play them because like they would rather spend their 4 experience or their 3 experience on something that's like newer and stronger, but like, well, just like better, or like even, we can even say in some ways just kind of like busted. But it's a very interesting thing, because I do think that I think this is a very interesting point. I just think that all these points that I've brought up here have really sat with me. And while I agree with the idea, I'm pointing the finger somewhere else for this hot take. But what do you think? This one I'm actually very interested in. I'm interested for all the points, obviously. And again, you can let me know if you have any of your own personal hot takes that you want to add to spice this up a bit. Because I found this to be a very fun video to put together and think about, and I would love to record another one. So again, drop them in the comments, yeah, just remember as well with hot takes. Hot takes can get people pretty heated because they are hot. Be kind is like my best advice that I can give you for it. Just like be chill about it. They're just people sharing their opinions. The other thing too is that I didn't share any of my own hot takes here because I think my hot takes are a little bit too hot. Judging by the one I did share on my Discord, people were like, "What the hell? You're crazy!" And I mean that's what you want to hear when you share a hot take, right? So maybe you'll drop a hot take that will make me say, "What the hell? You're crazy," and I can talk about it in a future one of these videos. But thanks so much for watching. Next week for our list video, it's the end of May, which means we always do. Travis, Bryn, and I are top 5 and bottom 5 investigators. So we'll see you for those videos in the next week. But in the meantime, have a good one. Thanks for watching, and as always, GG's.